Welcome to the afternoon session in the seminar theatre of Rail Live on this, the summer solstice. So Mark and I have just got back from Stonehenge, where we watched the sun coming up over the heel stone and chanted with the Druids, didn't we, Mark?
Annual ritual.
So you get about 17 hours of daylight today. That's the good news. The bad news is it's all downhill from here, and it'll be going dark at 3 o'clock in the afternoon before you know it. Not wanting to come over all Victor Meldrew or anything, you know, but
cheerful.
Yes, definitely the longest day. So there you go. We've had some fantastic speakers already. We had Andrew Haynes this morning. We've got Hugh Merriman tomorrow, the Transport Minister, and Lord Peter Hendy, Chair of Network Rail. So if any of you are around tomorrow, do come and see them. You'll probably see me asking exactly the same questions I asked Andrew Haynes this morning about GBR and rail policy and those wonderful people at the Treasury. But for now, we can talk about something different, a subject that's always been close to my heart. Rail was a supporter of HS2 before HS2 was invented. I rooted out an editorial I wrote the other day in about 2006 in which I was saying we ought to build a north-south high-speed line. And then Andrew Adonis came along and made it real. Then all hell broke loose about who wanted to save 4 minutes going to Birmingham. And it's been a lively ride. For the record, HS2, I believe, is utterly crucial. And I'm interested to hear what Mark says, because the original purpose of the scheme for me seems to have been sort of sacrificed on the altar of some political, well, a lot of politics really, you know, the idea of taking the fast trains off the West Coast Main Line, the Midland Main Line and the Great Northern Main Line, and then using the release capacity for example, 100-mile-an-hour interurban service to every station, and a freight service, because it's an obvious thing. But if you want to go from one end of a railway to the other at the fastest speed, then you can't really stop a lot in between. And that's led to an interesting life experience of places like Milton Keynes, which there's a very good joke I've always enjoyed about Milton Keynes this last few years, that it's got 12 fast trains an hour. The problem is only 2 of them stop. You can't stop at intermediate stations if you're going to want to get to Manchester in 2 hours. So HS2 for me is crucial, absolutely crucial. And to see it salami sliced by the government, chopping bits off here and there with the Eastern Arm and all the rest of it, Mark's been given a really tough job to do. I look forward to hearing maybe a bit about Euston. Are we going to have one?
Definitely.
And all that sort of thing. So it is, for me, utterly crucial to the future of UK PLC. The fact that current politicians don't maybe see that is of some interest. Now, Mark has been a friend of Rail magazine for a long time, which means I can't have given him a hard enough time, which we could always put that right. But as Chief Exec of High Speed 2, Mark has the privilege and the ultimate responsibility for leading the company charged with delivering a new high-speed railway that will connect the major cities of the UK, he says here. Mark joined HS2 in March 2017, and he's got 30 years' experience, including leadership roles in engineering, project and programme management, and business operations. Whether that prepared him for getting down and dirty with politicians at the level he has to, we'll maybe find out. Mark's had a successful track record across a mix of major organisations and investment programmes, and worked on the London 2012 Olympics and Crossrail, and previously the European MD of engineering and projects company CH2M. Mark started his career as a technician apprentice, fancy that, on the London Underground. He's a visiting professor at the Bartlett School of Sustainable Construction at UCL, an honorary fellow of the Association for Project Management, and a fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers, so there's a hell of a lot of experience there. And in 2019 he received an honorary doctorate of technology at the University of East London, and in 2021 the same honour from Loughborough University, home of the Great Central Railway. So without further ado, I give you Mr. Mark Thurston.
Oh dear. Thank you, Nigel. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for gathering to hear what I've got to say. So what am I going to do? I've got about 15 or plus minutes. The intent is to bring you all up to speed with where we've got to on HS2 and explain what the project is. I don't assume just because it's a rail industry audience you actually know what HS2 is, so hopefully I'll demystify that. Talk a little bit about where we think we're raising the bar in industry, and I think it's very relevant for an event like Rail Live, and then some of the benefits that we're pulling through. I know there's probably some questions around what we've learned so far, so that's the intent of the next 15 minutes. So where have we got to as a project? So I think it's fair to say that it's being built. As Nigel said in his introduction, HS2 will link 4 of the 5 largest economic regions, the Scottish Central Belt, the Northwest, the Midlands, and the Southeast. HS2 will become an integral part of our rail network, and it'll integrate with new lines and upgrades into the existing system. And as Nigel said, we will deliver much faster travel into those towns and cities, but beyond the route into places like Liverpool, Sheffield, Nottingham and Derby. This is a huge undertaking, and for the avoidance of doubt, it's slightly unprecedented that we have not built a new railway in this country, an intercity railway north of London, for over 100 years. Just to put the timeline into context, HS2 is really a 30-year project, 3 phases to get from London to the Midlands to Crewe, and from Crewe into Manchester. And as you can see from the diagram, we're about 13 years into that 30-year programme. As Nigel said, I've been in this role now just over 6 years, but there's still much more work to do before we fully connect up the country and integrate HS2 and certainly join up the North, the South and the Midlands. Just before I sort of get into where we've got to, I just want to dwell on safety for a moment, because it's one of our core values, not just for HS2, but of course it's a core value of the rail industry actually. And we had a very sad occasion just recently where we lost an operative at Marston Green, just southeast of Birmingham, in our Balfour Beatty Vancey contract. There's somewhere around 30,000 people working on the project, but as you can imagine, it has sort of cut to the core of the organisation, having a fatality on the project. So it made sense that we put safety first. Our supply chain is super important. We really get this railway built through the supply chain, and our work with the supply chain thus far has made great progress in improving standards in health, well-being and safety in infrastructure construction. But the events of April have certainly sort of brought our responsibility there into focus. Just to put a little bit of context now into the progress we've got. So we're most advanced on phase 1, the section between London and Birmingham, and we're making good progress. And the civils part of that project is now about 40% complete. We've launched 7 tunnelling machines so far, and this year Dorothy, 2,000-ton machine, travelled under Long Itchington Wood, not too far from here, near Leamington Spa, and she's built both tunnels now for that part of the route. Only last week, again, I wasn't too far from here at Bromford, just southeast of Birmingham city centre, with the Mayor of the West Midlands, and we launched our 7th machine, Mary Ann, and she's now working. We'll sort of launch that machine, we'll start digging later this month, and we'll sort of come out of the ground somewhere near Washwood Heath, where we're going to have the main train depot. And as you can see on the picture there, we've started the work on the major viaducts, which will sort of, these iconic V-shaped piers. And if you go into Birmingham New Street on the train, you look to your right, you can see where the new Curzon Street station will be, and you can see these piers that are being built coming out the ground. If we go further south, to what we call the central area, this is where we very much integrate 2 things: the new railway with the natural landscape. This is a very rural part of the route. And you can see on the left there our green tunnels, which are a very particular way of building tunnels for the railway. So we put those precast units in to create a tunnel, and effectively we will landscape back over the top of them. So when the railway is complete, you won't know it's even there. The other important point about the central area on phase 1 is you've got a major interface between HS2 and East West Rail. And what you can see there is a bridge that goes across a 2-mile cutting where you've got East West Rail and HS2 intersect. Coming further south, the 2 machines that we launched in the summer of 21, so those machines, Florence and Cecilia, are the most advanced under the Chilterns. They're well over halfway, about 60% into a 10-mile drive, so it's a very long drive. All the shafts for that section are at the bottom now, and we are also well on the way south of those tunnels, and as per the picture on the left there, building the 2.1 mile, what's called the Colne Valley Viaduct. This will be a new viaduct that goes right across the Colne Valley, across a series of lakes. So as the trains come out of the tunnel heading south, they'll go across up onto a viaduct and through in towards London. That will become the largest railway bridge in the country. On the right-hand side of that picture is just a sort of, and you get a size by looking at the two operatives there, is the huge, vast underground box at Old Oak Common in West London. And when this is complete, this will be the largest railway station in the country. Further north, we've got what we call Phase 2A. That's the section between the West Midlands and Crewe. We got royal assent for that section the early part of last year, and we're well on the way doing some of the utility works, environmental works, utility diversions, but the other thing about that and the way the Act works for HS2 is that as we sort of go into a community, naturally the construction is quite disruptive. There are funds made available by government to invest in local projects, so local people feel that this is something that gets done with them rather than to them. And you can see an example of a local funding project there at Stone. Stone's a really important location for the railway because that's where you have the main, where we're going to drive construction south and north to build that section of the route. Now, of course, Nigel made some comments in his introduction. Government have had to make some difficult decisions over the last few months around how much money they can continue to invest in HS2, and Phase 2A is on a sort of 2-year pause. We're sort of looking at trying to get some of the early scheme design done. Some of those early enabling works contracts we're actually closing out. But the intent is to sort of start that work in earnest again in the spring of 2025. I think the other important thing about Phase 2A is where, at the north end of that route, is the interface between HS2 and Crewe. And if anyone knows Crewe as a station and the layout there, there's a lot of work we're doing with Network Rail to make sure we can interface the new railway with the existing railway. And then finally, Phase 2B, that's the section between Crewe and Manchester. That bill, what we call hybrid bill, we deposited that into the Commons last year. The Select Committee is now sitting and hearing petitions on that. And of course, as you can see on the sort of top left, there's a lot of consult. So one of the learning points for us from the earlier two sections of the route is that we consult early with local groups, residents, businesses and the like, so that we can sort of deal with their concerns through the bill rather than they petition against the bill. One of the important things about the route into Manchester is that we have a commitment to deliver what's called biodiversity net gains. We've actually got to make the natural environment better for building the railway, whereas for the two southern sections, we've got what's called no net loss. So we have a sort of a neutral position. And that's sort of really revolutionary, sort of really groundbreaking for a big infrastructure project, particularly a rail project, to have that commitment for biodiversity net gain. So I think it's fair to say that we're full steam ahead. You can read the stats. We're really proud of our apprenticeship program. Lots of people are starting their careers, or we in fact have gone back to work on HS2. There's somewhere in the region of 2,500 businesses right across the country now working on the program. I think the pleasing thing there is 60% plus of those organisations are small and medium-sized enterprises. Many of the businesses that will be represented here today at Rail Live, and over 90% of them are UK-based businesses. So the sort of £23 billion we've invested in HS2 today has gone very much into the UK economy. And I think the final thing to say on that slide is the construction of our trains. Got a joint venture between Hitachi and Alstom. So those trains, the bogies will be made at the Alstom facility in Crewe. The shells will be built by Hitachi in Newton Aycliffe, and the whole thing's come together and will be assembled and commissioned at the Alstom factory in Derby, where I was earlier this year. So a great story for the sector and for the railway supply chain. So just a few areas I want to talk about where I think we're raising the bar at HS2. We've sort of made innovation something you have to opt out of. There's lots of examples now where we are working with the supply chain to bring sort of new techniques and technology into the way we design, construct. Ultimately, we're going to operate this railway. About 150 innovation projects now are live, and they've delivered, we think, somewhere in the order of £180 million worth of savings and efficiencies. And one of the other drivers of our innovation programme is to drive carbon out of this railway. The built environment generally generates a huge amount of carbon in this country. It's mostly through concrete and steel. And we've, through our innovation programme, found ways of getting 1.6 million carbon tonnes out of the railway. So good progress there. I think the other point about construction is it's quite a dirty business. And if you went to an HS2 site today, you'd see hydrogen-powered construction vehicles, solar-powered welfare units. We've got 2 of the 5 2,500-ton electric crawler cranes in the world working on our sites. At the beginning of last year, we issued a net zero carbon plan, and our commitment at HS2 is for this to be a net zero project by 2035. So when this railway opens, it will be the greenest railway in the country. Of all of our 350 odd sites to date, 19 of them are already diesel free. We use no diesel at all on those sites, and we've committed to have all of our sites diesel free by 2029. So again, a big push on our side on how we make construction greener. And then we talk about the green corridor. HS2 is also the country's biggest ever environmental project. We're creating what we call a green corridor alongside the railway. If you ever travel, interestingly, or drive around Kent today, you virtually can't see HS1, and they didn't have a planting programme at the time. It all came afterwards. We've already planted some 900,000 odd trees on the route. We've got a target to plant 7 million trees and bushes along the route. We're protecting some 33 square kilometres of natural wildlife. To put that into context, that's about 4,500 football pitches. So very much HS2 is sort of breaking new ground in finding a way of balancing the sort of building infrastructure alongside the natural environment. But of course, this project is going to take a long time to complete, as per my earlier slide. So what are some of the benefits we're feeling around the country today? We've invested, as I've already said, we've got 2 funds, one called a Community Environment Fund, one a Business and Local Economy Fund, about £45 million worth of projects, £15 million already been invested in some 230 projects along the route. And as you can see on the pictures there, we've done some work in Northamptonshire on a new bike track, tree planting in the outskirts of Birmingham with a local charity, and that on the right-hand side is a local community centre in Holborn. So it's very important as part of the programme that HS2 invests in those communities that are impacted by the construction. And of course, we talk, as Rail does, and Nigel does, about skills in our sector a lot, and of course building this railway, we've got a huge opportunity to create a skills legacy for the sector. As I say, we're best part of 3,000 businesses between Dundee and Devon. We have got great opportunities to have organisations invest in apprentices and graduates and bring new young people into our sector, and we've got a target of 2,000 apprenticeship starts, and we're over 1,200. I think the other thing about the workforce in our sector is it's not as diverse as it could be, and we're very proud of the fact that we've now got 28% of the whole workforce on HS2 is female, and inside HS2 Limited that I run, we're at 37%. I've got gender balance in my exec team, and from ethnic minorities, 18% of the supply chain is from ethnic minorities, and again 22% inside HS2. So we're very proud of the work we're doing with the supply chain to create a much more diverse workforce and gets to parts of the community that we might not otherwise get to. And as the sort of map shows there are over 400,000 contract opportunities right across the UK. And it's not just issues to help us build the railway in terms of engineering and construction, but with such a large workforce, we need catering, stationery, accommodation, transport, logistics, you name it. This is now a national endeavour, a huge enterprise, and huge opportunities for the sector. And of course, HS2 isn't just a transport project, it's very much an economic project. And just in the West Midlands alone, where we've sort of got our base, we've let £1.7 billion worth of contracts. Over 420 businesses in the West Midlands alone have worked on the project, to nearly 9,000 people. And the combined authority have predicted that HS2 will create 20,000 new permanent jobs in that area, create opportunities for over 2,000 new homes, and will and around Curzon Street, we will add something like £1.56 billion to the local economy. And yesterday I was in Crewe with the High Speed Rail Group conference, and again there's a lot of activity now thinking about how do we maximise the value and investment in somewhere like Crewe, where again 35,000 plus jobs and 7,000 new homes all in that area in East Cheshire just by the early 2040s. And then finally, Of course, you can't spend all this money and have all this learning across 3 phases without capturing it. We launched our Learning Legacy website a couple of years back at the IET in London. We've got our website set up. The slide there gives you a bit of an insight in some of the areas that we've already started to capture. We've taken a very similar approach to projects like the Olympics and Crossrail. And of course, our obligation is to make sure that we learn as an organisation, but actually the wider rail sector learns from what we're doing. So that's me. I guess in summary, we're at peak construction now. 2023, 4 and 5 are our peak years. We are very much getting on and building this railway. We are using innovation and scale to change the way we do construction of infrastructure in the UK. And I think it's fair to say that the benefits of this project are being felt already. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. First thing I have to congratulate you about, given the pressures you must be under from government and protesters and everything else, you always look so cheerful. See that smile? He's always like that. Because it must be some achievement to be able to do that in the face of it all. So, we've got a few minutes, so let's get stuck straight into it. Are we ever going to get to Euston?
Absolutely, absolutely. This railway doesn't work if we don't get to Euston. If you look at where in other parts of the world where they've built high-speed railways, the whole point of making them so compelling, certainly as an alternative to sort of domestic air, is you go right into the city centre. And so government understand that. We've got a 2-year pause for funding reasons, but also we've currently got a solution for Euston we can't afford. So we've got 2 reasons to sort of put a foot on the ball, draw a breath. And I was actually on a meeting with Peter Hendy, amongst others from Network Rail in the department this morning. So there's a lot of work now to use the pause to make sure that we come up with a scheme for Euston that works. But there is no way this railway will ever work just stopping at Old Oak Common. No. We always intended to open the railway between Curzon Street and Old Oak Common anyway. And of course there you've got a major interchange onto the Great Western Main Line that we're going to build, and onto the Elizabeth line back into London, and obviously west to Berkshire and Heathrow. But that will only ever serve us for so long.
I mean, we don't want to get too much into use, and we could be here for the rest of the week, couldn't we? But are we going to end up with a station which is built to what we can afford, in inverted commas, which will then be too small and constrain the scope for the railway for the future, in terms of number of platforms?
Yeah, I mean, that's the work we've got to do, Nigel. I mean, I think, as Peter and I have discussed, and people in this room will probably know better than me, wherever we've built railways in this country, we've never regretted it. You know, we agonised about extending the Jubilee line into Canary Wharf, and it's transformed East London. There was lots of heartburn around Crossrail, particularly when it sort of found its troubles in 2018, and now the Elizabeth line is getting criticised because it's too busy. So I think the sort of big strategic opportunity for, frankly, ministers ultimately, because they're going to have to make this decision, but we're going to have to give them the advice around this, is to sort of see what the long-term strategic opportunity is for Euston, that's going to serve not just the Midlands and the North West, but of course we're already talking to the government about a link to the East Midlands. So notwithstanding they've cancelled the section to Leeds. So there's, I think the sort of long-term latent capacity at Euston's got to be in our thinking as part of this pause exercise.
Because it would be madness, wouldn't it, to constrain the capacity of the network by building a station that's insufficiently platformed.
Crackers. It'd be crackers.
But
we've got to make it pay.
You know, but we're neurotic about big infrastructure in this country, full stop, aren't we? The M25, Jubilee Line extension, Edinburgh trams, it doesn't matter what it is, it causes an almighty fuss while we're building it. And within 6 months of it opening, we're all saying, how the hell did we manage without it? I mean,
yeah, you've got more experience in this than I have, but you're onto something there, and that's. But of course, the government is dealing with, and you're going to hear from, I think, the Minister tomorrow. The government is dealing with, a huge deficit on the back of COVID.
So we can reject the notion that's being gossiped about at the minute that it's going to end at Old Oak.
Absolutely, and Hugh Merriman will absolutely confirm.
You heard it here first.
Absolutely,
from the Chief Executive of HS2.
There is no point building this railway north of Old Oak Common without Euston.
Are we going to start doing the tunnel into Euston? Because if they put that back, that's really going to put a spoke in the wheel, because the TBMs have to go in at that end and all the spoil has to come out.
Yeah, yeah, and we're just working that now with the contractor on what we can afford in this 2-year sort of pause period. So, you know, there's a lot of work going on to understand how we get best value from the work we've done and make sure that once we've worked out the scheme for Euston, we get back in the ground pretty quick in 2025. And how much of that tunnelling we do and don't do is sort of part of the work.
And whatever we do at Euston, without getting too techie, boring everybody rigid, is it going to remain a grade separated station throughout?
Yeah, we've looked at that, yeah. Yeah, the idea of a flat junction on the as you come out of Euston doesn't work. Because all you do then is constrain it further back.
The whole point of my question, Mark.
Exactly. Yeah, no, the cavern's a huge piece of civil engineering, but to have a grade separated junction as you come out of Euston, recognising, if you know Euston today, the existing platforms are here, the HS2 platforms to the west are below ground.
Why did it, in 2 or 3 sentences, how has it gone so wrong at Euston then?
I think we fundamentally and I've been in Public Accounts Committee on this, and there's been a report by the NEO, so I'm not saying anything here that's not in the public domain, but I think fundamentally we have collectively underestimated the sheer scale and complexity of this. Is like building an airport terminal. This is huge. I mean, the ultimate perimeter and all the road, all the work we've got to do on utility diversions, the power. The other big sort of, I think, surprise for us that we've really understood it is the interchange to London Underground. If you've been through Euston and the ticket hall as you come up the Underground is totally inadequate. There's no way you could discharge thousands of HS2 passengers into that ticket hall so they can go onward into the network. So we're having to build major interchange for London Underground. So fundamentally, as we've done the design and understood the design and the scale of, you know, the quantities of, you know, literally concrete, steel, to build the roof, all the cladding, the substructure and the superstructure, it's vast. And frankly, until we've fully had a 3D model for it, which we didn't have until September last year and have costed it, and we've all had to take a sharp breath when we saw the number. But the problem, in fact, that, you know, the challenge for us now, how do we take that and re-engineer that to something that we can afford?
Okay, I could ask you questions all afternoon, Mark, but we better open it up. Anybody else got any questions? Oh, look at that. Why am I not surprised? There's somebody over here. If you could say who you are and your affiliation, and then over here next. And was there somebody over this side as well? No.
Lady there as well.
Was it you?
There's a lady there, Nigel, I think was also that.
Oh, you, sorry. And well, let's do you two first and then go over there.
Hi, Andy Pritchard from Langer Rock. You mentioned there's a delay now in phase 2A and subsequent phase 2B as well. What lessons learned are HS2 taking forward in the whole tender process and procurement process for the projects based on what's happened on phase 1? What are your key lessons learned that you can be taking forward into the next phase?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. There's a number of lessons we're taking from phase into civils, and the civils part of the job. One is what responsibility we take for design, and when do we transfer design to the supply chain versus do we hold it ourselves? That's an important point for us, and we're thinking about that in phase 2A. Packaging, I mean, these civils contracts on phase 1 are huge. And I think arguably we've all, with the supply chain, you know, we've got there now, and as you've seen from the pictures, you know, we're off building this thing. But I think our intent, certainly for phase 2A, will be to maybe have some slightly smaller packages that may be air and asset based. I think the way we acquire the land has been a real learning point for us. We've sort of tried to not disrupt landowners with the best of intentions on phase 1, only take land when we needed it. But actually that would prove, with so many different land parcels, proved to be hellishly complex. So taking a much more fixed land in much bigger shapes to enable construction is another important point. I could go on. There's sort of the 3 big ones, I think. And then I think the other thing for, you know, I'm aware, having come from the private sector, how expensive it is to keep sort of bidding and rebidding projects, and obviously the deferral is disappointing. So we're sort of, again, when we go back to market on phase 2A, we want to make sure that we are sensitive to what it would cost to bid and how we set ourselves up to make sure we make that as cost effective for the supply chain. Because otherwise, those costs will only come through into the project another way.
And the lady?
Hi, yeah, Emma Porter from Story Contracting, but I also sit on Cumbria LEP and Carlisle's Town Deal Board, which is probably more relevant to my question. I do feel it's a bit stupid asking a difficult question because I'm the next speaker and this might come and bite me in a half an hour, but never mind. In a similar vein to the commitment to building a station at Euston that has capacity for the future, do you think there's going to be an appetite to do the same at Piccadilly and make that an underground station and a through station, then it can connect to Leeds and Bradford? Because, you know, government talks about ambition for the north and commitment to the north, but I think Piccadilly being an overground station really shows a lack of ambition for the north. I just wondered what your thought was.
Easy one for you there, Mark.
Well, I have to be, I mean, seriously, I have to be super careful with my answer on that because the scheme as promoted by the Secretary of State that we've put into the bill is the overground station, as you all full well know. So effectively we'd bring if you've been into Piccadilly, you come in at height and the new station would sit alongside that and you transfer at the same level. Stakeholders in Manchester have been very clear they'd like to see the station come in underneath. There's a massive cost differential associated with that, a massive disruption differential, but there are merits to the scheme, as you say, in a concept of sort of through running. That's like a live issue literally this week and last week in the Select Committee, and the Select Committee will opine on the answer. So there's really no point in me doing other than, for those less informed in the room, just understand what the sort of the options are. And that will play out in the fullness of time. And I think if the Minister was asked that question tomorrow, he would have probably a similar view because it's with the committee now.
As a northerner, Emma, I have some sympathy with the thinking behind that question. And I'm sure Andy Burnham will continue battling away for what he sees is right. Gentleman over here.
Yeah, thanks. Toby Radcliffe, West Midlands, Rail Exec. Going back to Old Oak Common, what I haven't seen is what the impact of terminating at Old Oak Common is going to be in terms of, given that we might have this for a number of years as the temporary terminus, what is the capacity, the capability of Old Oak Common going to be in terms of trains per hour?
Yep.
And are there any tweaks that can be done to the layout, even at this relatively late stage, to maximise that capacity?
Yeah, so the intent is to, when we open the railway, for what we would call sort of a captive service, that's just be a high-speed service between Curzon Street and Birmingham and Old Oak Common, the expectation will be 3 trains an hour. And I think we'll start there because, amongst other things, we have to prove the railway works and having sort of commissioned the railway. We are exploring what it would mean to the infrastructure at Old Oak Common to increase that to 6 trains per hour. But to do that, you've then got to sort of complete the railway north of Birmingham and Handsacre Junction, so you've got opportunity to run trains further north. And frankly, the passenger modelling is work that now needs, you know, that the department are leading on to make sure. I know there's a lot of concern in London that as we discharge even 3 trains an hour at peak into Old Oak Common, can the sort of onward system cope with, particularly the Elizabeth line and the Great Western Main Line, cope with the sort of passenger numbers. So there's work to be done there, to your question, Toby, to really understand that. But in terms of what we're building and the specification, it starts at 3, and we're looking at what it would mean to be able to reverse trains so we could run 6. And it will require some work to the infrastructure, sort of physically south of the station, so you can reverse trains. But that's work in train, as you can imagine.
If there's any more, I'll pretend I haven't seen Paul over there doing that, and we'll
Timed out.
Gentleman down here, let's just push our luck a bit. And then one more at the back and that's it. Hang on, wait a minute, Ben.
Hi, Ben Jones, freelance journalist, sometimes work for Rail. With reducing the project in scope, are you going to have to go back to Alstom and Hitachi and have an awkward conversation about reducing the order for trains?
That's not our intent at the moment. The core order for 54 trains stands, so that's the intent.
It's not our intent at the moment, Ben. One more gentleman at the back had his hand up, and then we're done, I'm sorry. But you've got more questions than Andrew Haynes, Mark, so there's a thirst for knowledge about HS2 while the man building it is in the room.
Hi, Mark. Pete Ellis, Director of Production Services within Network Rail. Quite a segue from the previous question, really. Where do you, HS2, visualise the testing commissioning of the 54 trains that are destined for the network?
Yeah, so what we will do is what we call in our presentation, I talked about north, south and central. So the central area is what we're going to call test area 0. So we'll bring the trains in at Calvert and we'll run the trains Calvert and at the one end, you've got Washwood Heath at the other, and the intent is then to build that first section out, and that's where we'll do all the testing and proving, driver training, and then ultimately we'll commission the railway north and south into Curzon and Old Oak.
Okay. Right, just one last question from me, and I don't know if my knowledge is fully up to date on this. Maybe Emma there is more up to speed, but if there's an election next year, as is looking increasingly likely, there's a change of government, the Labour Party, as I understand it, are still committed to building HS2 in full and NPR. So would you be looking forward to getting a phone call from Kieran saying, Mark, get on with building all of it. We're putting the Eastern Arm back in, Goulburn Link, all the lot.
Well, you always try and draw me on a political question, don't you? And I'm not a politician, so I need to be careful. Look, in the last election, HS2 was in the manifesto of all three parties. And I have nothing to suggest that's not going to be the case this time next year if there's election. So, but I think whatever government finds itself in power after an election next year, they're going to have the same funding and cash constraints that this government's got today, because that problem's not going away anytime soon.
But they have said they'll build it in full and NPR.
Well,
you stand ready to deliver if required.
Well, if you think that the original scheme when I came into this job was to build the full wire network into Leeds and Manchester, and if that gets reinstated, then we'll have to deal with that in the fullness of time.
Fair enough. You're very good at this, or you're used to me asking questions about it, and you. Thanks very much, Mark. That's really good. And it really isn't easy sitting up here talking to an audience of people that know what they're talking about, asking you questions which I'm sure you'd rather not hear. But thanks very much for doing it with such incredible good humour, and thanks to all you for showing up and showing up again. Indeed, we'll see you in the morning for the next two. Thanks ever much. Enjoy the rest of the show. Have a great day.